Yep.
With that though, I mean, I like looking at the advantages of podcasting, and especially when I compare it to something like Twitch streaming. What was it that made it an advantage for you and Matt and Nisha and Adrian that you saw podcasting as an advantage, besides something like Twitch streaming, which is huge right now?
So for us, and I'll speak from mine and Nisha's sense, because at the time that I made But Why Though, Twitch still hadn't, it was there, but it wasn't what it is now. But when me and Nisha made, or when Nisha and I made Did You Have To, we thought about doing live streams. We thought about having live streams, but the thing is podcasting is great, but it is very much relied on consistency in the same way that streaming is relied on consistency. The difference is if I know that I'm going to be out for 2 weeks, me and Nisha can have a bulk record session where we record 3 episodes and we don't miss our schedule. If I'm out for 2 weeks on a platform where I need to stream every Tuesday, there's really not a way around that. So a lot of it is just an ease of use, but it's also an ease of access. So when you look at people who understand different types of platforms, teaching an older person how to use iTunes is a hell of a lot easier than teaching them how to use Twitch. So you have a wider audience in a sense that you're using technology that is already accustomed in people's life. People already have the apps, people already have Spotify, people are already using these things. So the barrier of entry is a lot lower versus something like Twitch. Now, there are benefits to Twitch that we've thought of. Now, me and Nisha have done a live show before, and part of that is chat involvement. But also you have to take your identity into consideration. Me and Nisha talking about anti-Blackness and anime on Twitch is an invite to a whole bunch of trolls, which can derail the conversation and make it really hard to actually have something concise and productive as you would in a pre-recorded podcast. So it's really just understanding what type of messaging you want to get out, how you want that messaging to look, and where your benefits lie. Also, like, I don't want to get dolled up every day to just go sit and talk about my hero. Like, let me just roll out of bed, go to my recording, and then be done. That's it. And it's not to devalue Twitch, but all of us, everybody involved, have full-time jobs outside of it. And because our getting podcasts to generate money is really hard, we have to look at it from a hobbyist perspective, and we have to look at it, how do we work this into our daily life?
That's always kind of the first advice I tell students if we're ever talking about influencing. I say your first line of thought is don't quit your day job, because it's difficult to make money when it comes to gaining followers, ad revenue, all that kind of stuff. I do find this super fascinating, not only in this perspective of you do kind of things on your own time, the accessibility. Do you find that there are a lot of people like that wider individual that might use iTunes that you wouldn't normally see in something like Twitter? Because I mean, I teach, and I teach things like how to use things like Discord, and I try to teach that to faculty. And I might as well be teaching German. It's very difficult for a lot of people. But iTunes, on the other hand, especially for some of our older faculty, it's pretty darn easy. Do you find that there's a decent audience listening to your material there?
Oh yeah, I also find that there's a decent audience who aren't even plugged into social media. Because that's the other thing. Like, targeting social programs is great, but at some point, and this is what we've realized with the podcast, you end up cannibalizing your own community to a certain extent, because everybody that your individual host follows already follow theirs, and growth becomes something that's hard. But when you look at something like iTunes or Spotify, Apple, or Google Music, all that stuff that's already built in, you have a wider base, because your base is anybody with a phone. And that, like, looking at it from the mobile sense, because the majority of our downloads do come from mobile listens, that is something that makes it not generationally based. Like, my dad listens to podcasts. My dad doesn't even know what the hell Twitter is, and he definitely doesn't have or want a Facebook page. But he listens to a whole bunch of podcasts because he got recommended one on his Google playlist, or his email one time. Google Music was like, hey, here are the things. And he was like, what's this? and now he listens to podcasts. So when you look at like the type of audiences, like that's just much easier and more robust. Because there are roadblockers when it comes to new tools, but also when it comes to new communities. If you've never been involved in social media, if you've never been involved in a Twitch community before, that's really daunting. And while some people do make Twitter accounts just to follow podcasts, I know a couple of people who do. Um, not everybody's like that. So you need to be like podcasts are a really valuable marketing tool because you're reaching people that aren't on any of the other platforms.
That's super interesting. Again, talking about and it always kind of comes back to, I don't ever want to, especially when I teach social media strategies, I don't ever want to sit here and say one is better than the other. I want to go into what are the uses and accessibilities for utilizing this. And so I had not been teaching podcasts this entire time that I've been doing it for 3 years. And when I was going over my syllabi, I'm like, I'm missing an colossal asset for what you could use this for. And I'm kicking myself now because this is something that's really important and that a lot of people do. And then you get into multi platforms in terms of using iTunes and Spotify, which a lot of people don't. It's like they say radio was dead, but now it's almost like it's more popular than ever.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I had a train of thought and I lost it. But when you do your particular podcast, what is the format that you like to do? Was it like multi-host, monologuing, interviews, and what are the advantages that you see with those?
I hate monologuing. I hate it. I don't listen to them. I don't do them. Because for me, a lot of the joy of podcasts is listening to people interact off each other, play off of each other, and make you feel like you're actually like sitting with people, which is even more important in the pandemic. So I do a mix. So I also run interviews into our podcast feed, but they're structured interviews. They're interviews that PR reached out to me to do, and I'm going through to talk about their film. But one of the things that we really love, like multi-hosts helps because it gives you a dynamic. I will say first and foremost, you need a good host over a good microphone because a bad host, a bad connection, it will tank your entire podcast. So, But Why Though is on episode 171 now. We redid our entire format and our host lineup at episode 17. So my husband actually wasn't an original host. We had another host who flaked on his responsibilities. And then we brought in somebody to kind of supplement. And then that person flaked on their responsibilities. And so we had to kick them out and like decide, okay, what do we do? Do we stop where we were at or do we keep chugging along and slide somebody else in? We chose the latter. And the average podcast only lasts about 16 episodes. And a lot of that has to do with hosting. You have to find people not only that you gel with, but that you can work with and that will take the responsibilities just as seriously as you will. If not, you'll become the workhorse and it won't be fun anymore.
No.
So multi-host format is what I like, but beyond that, we also really like incorporating guests. So for both of my podcasts, mainly But Why Though, because it is focused on one piece of subject matter, it may be something that we need to talk about, but not all of us may be super well versed. So we'll bring in an outside party who can serve as that expert lens, who can serve as what they love. And I actually, our Zelda episode is a really good example of it because like, I don't know anything about Zelda. Matt didn't know much about Zelda and Adrian had played a few games, but didn't really get it. But Emery here has literally been a part of a book about Zelda. So trying to identify where your gaps are, that is one of the best ways to utilize guests. And it also helps you grow your base because you're tapping into new audiences that may not have known who you were before, but they listen to that one episode, they may go back and listen to more.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, well, and I'll say this, if you ever want anybody, since now I know that you've watched it, need anybody for Demon Slayer, you know where to find me.
Yes.
Just saying. Are you comfortable with answering questions that we have from? Okay, cool. So Ken has got a great question here. Is in a different sense of the word, how can podcast or streams reach a disabled audience? That's one of the main hurdles in my
Yeah.
book as somebody living in and studying disability, different sense of the word accessible.
Yeah, no, that is a 100% amazing question, because the largest hurdle is making sure that you can transcribe your podcast. We have done it twice, and that was because we actually did interviews with deaf folks who were running charities and stuff. But the thing is, and this is the hard thing, and I see it all the time on Twitter, accessibility is extremely important, especially when it comes to reaching disabled audiences, because everybody should be included and everybody should be able to be a part of the conversation. That said, the majority of podcasters are like us and have full-time jobs and can't dedicate time to transcribe podcasts and don't have the money to transcribe podcasts. And that's where the biggest issue lies. Now, that is not an excuse for anybody like the Conan O'Briens who decide to start their podcasts and stuff like that. They are not indie pods. They don't have the same structure or hurdle as we do. It's hard. It's making, like, I don't know how to answer that because I know the solution, but it also leads to transcribers getting paid less or people volunteering to do it out of the kindness of their heart. That's the hard thing. Is just because the majority of podcasting ad revenue gets eaten up by the Conan O'Briens of the world who decide one day they want to make a podcast and nobody cares about anybody else. So being able to have a substantial revenue stream to fund accessibility measures is really hard. It's a lot easier when you have when you stream on Twitch. So that's actually a positive for streaming on Twitch. And I know a lot of accessibility folks in gaming who specifically stream on Twitch to take use of the auto captions feature. And I know some folks who've worked on that auto captioning to make it better over time. So they will choose to stream on Twitch to make it more accessible to audiences. But again, that also comes into factoring time, money, and resources, which is not a great answer. But it's kind of where we end up at, and it's understanding, like, because if I could, I would have every episode that I do on both my podcasts transcribed, but like it's just not feasible, which is hard, and it sucks to say, and it hurts me every time I have to say it, because obviously I am marginalized in my own ways, and being left out of a conversation is never something that you want somebody to feel like. But yeah, that's kind of where we are. Unfortunately, that's a really sad answer. I wish it could be better. But that's kind of the big wall that everything runs into.
I will say, to kind of put a little bit more of a positive spin on this, there was a really cool article about podcasts in 2021 that was talking about uses of accessibility and bringing this to light. Google is making an initiative, not only on their SEO, which is their voice search engine optimization, but it's not only going to show up on their SEO, which is huge, but the other thing is that they're talking about is converting transcriptions into blog posts,
Wow.
which would be super helpful if that's done. But I understand where you're coming from, because I know somebody that is an accessibility streamer, and she works for Apple. So, she makes a good living. She runs a very small stream. But the thing is, when I talk to her about, like, I've got all this interview data, can I do something for an automatic transcription service? And she goes, yeah, how much are you willing to pay? And I'm like, damn it, that's a really unfortunate thing to go into. But I do think there are things that are in works right now, hopefully sooner the better, to bring this into a much more accessible light here. Oh my gosh, there's so many good questions. I'm like abandoning my track. I'm like, I don't even care. All right, so another question by Aaron. I've been interested in having my own podcast for a couple of years now, but I'm hesitant starting at this age in my life. Is podcasting something you still being popular in many years from now on? And also, what is the best advice for someone beginning a podcast?
Get a good host. That's my number one advice. But really, I see podcasts as sticking around. And it's because, like, there are so many different types of podcasts. There are informative podcasts, there are narrative podcasts, there are interview podcasts. Like podcasts present an even more open space than radio because you can create the content that you want and you can also create the community that you want. Like I will be honest, like I got involved in podcasting and the podcasting community because indies have to work really hard to promote themselves. They're really open and really like good to each other and kind, and the audience is always going to be there for it. The only problem that you have is trying to find where you can fit in that audience. But there are a lot of folks who will get you. So like long story short, yes, I think it will be around. I think it's replaced radio. I think podcasting in some form or another, whether it's just chatting or talk shows on Twitch or podcasting in an audio sense. Although the US did take a pretty significant hit when COVID started because the majority of podcast listening was done while commuting. So that's really the only factor. But outside of that, like it is something that will still be around. And also, I don't know if it was a specific age thing when you said point in your life, or if it's just kind of like you're too busy right now and you want to do something in the future. But like there are podcasters of so many ages, of so many different generations. Like podcasting is a phenomenal medium that really allows everybody to reach everybody and do it in a way that kind of removes any sort of age discrimination. Um, the comments they get left when you're a woman as a podcaster, that's a different story. But yeah, so I would say definitely this is something that will keep going long into the future, in my opinion, at least.
Now with that, and Alex and Ethan, I definitely want to get to your questions, and we will. One thing I wanted to ask as a follow-up, do you see podcasting and kind of these topics becoming even more niche as we are progressing with things like Discord and Clubhouse? And, it almost seems like these streaming services are making it so that they're more and more niche. Do you see podcasting going in that same direction?
What do you mean by niche, I guess?
So in other words, it's not so much that a person is an expertise in pop culture, they're an expertise in anime, or they're
yes, 100%. I have a friend who just started a podcast all about Pedro Pascal, where they watch a different Pedro Pascal movie or episode and talk about it. Like, yeah, the thing is everybody has that really weird data center in their brain that just has useless information that nobody else really would care about. But if you make a podcast about it, there's gonna be a whole bunch of people who do care. Like, to be honest, did you have to start it as just a podcast where we watched anime adaptations and we reviewed them? That's what it started out as. And we ended up making it more broad when we realized we needed to create a larger space for brown and black women to talk. But yeah, like there will be more and more niche podcasts. And in a way, doing a niche podcast kind of gives you a leg up in the space because it is in the same way streaming is, you're fighting for attention. And when there are 20 pop culture podcasts or 200 pop culture podcasts, getting people to come listen to But Why Those a little hard. But there's like one Pedro Pascal podcast, and you can plug that every time Pedro Pascal does something adorable.
Which is all the time.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, no, I think it has become more niche over time and it will keep getting more niche, but that's also where you get really, really interesting thought projects that allow people to expand on ideas. One of the first podcasts I ever listened to is Beltway Banthas, which is a Star Wars and politics podcast. One of the original hosts, Swara, is actually now on our podcast network with his Into the Spider cast, where they just talk about Spider-Man, and he's a contributor and editor for us. For our website. So podcasting is a world that is great, and never be afraid of niche.
That's so cool. And I have one more follow-up to that. When we're looking into niche, I know one of the biggest things that were talked about in this class, as well as my streaming class, was, and Alex, I'm going to ask your question specifically, but how do you find that need? How do you find that desire to say that this is something that hasn't been explored? What what mindset do you need to have to get to that point?
That's a good question because I've never thought about that. It's 100%. I've never thought of. I think the closest that we get to is when we plan our content calendars for But Why Though. So like we'll sit down, we'll look at social media trends, we'll look at upcoming releases. But so far as like trying to identify an audience, the best way is just searching it on Twitter. How many people are talking about X does X? Or how many people are talking about Star Wars and politics? How many people are talking about costume design and action movies and how it impact? Like you can like do a Twitter search, see how many people are engaging on those posts, see what's making it viral. If like honestly, the reason that my friend started the Pedro Pascal podcast is they noticed they'd make Pedro Pascal tweets and they would go viral like nearly instantly. And so they started doing that. And the other thing is too, is like, I do want to say, like, if you're going to start your own podcast and you're not doing it specifically to market a specific thing for a brand, pick something you care about because burnout is real and getting your podcast off the ground is a lot of work. Actually, another piece of really good advice when you start your podcast, record at least 4 to 5 episodes in advance so you have stuff to go out and you don't end up messing up with your release cadence right off the bat. You need to build in a strong base, and giving people more things to listen to is good. Record an episode 0 where you intro you and your concept, and then do an episode 1, release those 2 at the same time, then go on and with your standard release schedule. But giving people more to hold on to will retain your listenership that comes in. But yeah.
That's and to go along with that, piggybacking off of the start, Alex asks a great question: is how did you promote or get your podcast off the ground when it first started up? Did you have to use social media exclusively, or are there other methods of promoting it that you found effective?
So I'll start with But Why Though, because I already had a really established social media presence when we did You Have To, so that one was a lot easier. I made a Twitter account back in 2014 to win stuff at South by Southwest. I wanted free things. I did not use that thing at all until 2017 when we decided to make the podcast. Honestly, what I did was I dove into listening to podcasts. And when we made our Twitter account about 2 months before, we put out a tweet saying, here's a new pop culture podcast coming, blah, 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 blah. And then we followed all the hosts and podcasts of things that I followed all the hosts and podcasts that I already liked that were in the same space. And I used that account to go and comment on other people's things. And then we recorded an episode and we released it. And when the mistake that I learned there was we weren't able to launch with enough. We didn't have multiple episodes to go up. But what I did learn is by putting yourself out there and ahead of time, you're building up that base. We did rely a lot on social media. We still do. But the place outside that was conventions, which is kind of not a no-go for COVID. But we went to conventions and we marketed the hell out of our podcast, and we didn't have official license to be anywhere, but we live recorded from the floor at PAX South because we decided that we were just going to do that, where we sat at a table and we recorded a recap of PAX South at the last day and randomly pulled people that we saw walking by to do it with us. And then we gave them our cards. And so like that type of like in-person method, which is kind of not a thing now, was how we did it when we started. But guests is one of the biggest ways that you can grow. Find people who have footholds in the communities that you're trying to reach, and they will bring their audiences. And most probably a lot of them will stick around. And then for me and Nisha, for Did You Have To, building it with an already established social presence, it was a lot of selling ourselves to then sell the concept. So when Nisha and I, because both of my podcasts work with ad revenue now, it's very small. It's like $15 an episode, but like we finally hit the point where we can get paid $50 an episode, which is nice. A lot of it is us marketing ourselves and our individual social media accounts and being like, and we'll also put this on the show, and using what we've grown to feed into it, versus with But Why Though, we grew But Why Though and then filtered it out the other way. Does that answer the question?
I think one of the best things, especially for the project that we're working on, because we're trying to do a service learning project here in the high country of North Carolina, within the community of Boone, North Carolina, and we're looking at nonprofits and trying to establish a digital event with them. And so, one thing that I really liked about your answer was we're talking about potentially utilizing all these things. Now, they don't have to do a podcast. If they wanted to, they could. But with that, establishing people that are big within the community, maybe somebody that is not only that works for the organization that you're talking to, but is also, again, as you mentioned, community leaders goes a long way. And I also like the collaboration aspect of it, because it does not only bring in the audience, or not only brings in the person that that might be the guest, but it also brings in their audience as well. Because Kate and I met at PAX South, and it was kind of interesting how that was like, I don't even know how we met in this case, but it was cool because not only do we have the connection to be able to talk on like me being on their podcast, but we brought Kate into our little niche space in Geeks Like Us, which was really, really cool. So that collaboration goes such a long way. And I think, again, bringing in leaders, bringing in people with a lot of credibility can be a major asset, again, pragmatically for your event.
And I will say too, like one of the biggest things in podcasting, and this is where I think a lot of it fails, is when you start seeing other people as competition. At the end, you are competing for ears, and at the end of the day, you want yours to get listened to over the other person's. But when you start seeing it as a rising tide lifts all boats, you realize that you can actually get somebody to listen to both of your podcasts if you work together, and you end up instilling a larger community, and you also end up with more faithful communities because you're not being mean to other people. And I know that it feels weird to say that, but like there are definitely some podcasts who run off of a very competitive model. And like saying that, I am an extremely competitive person. I am really driven, but I also understand that indie pods have a really hard time. So like I'm happy you like said collaboration explicitly, because collaboration is one of the big reasons why my podcast grew into a podcast network and a website, because we were able to collaborate with others. We were able to find people who liked our mission and liked us, and we're able to grow. And when you see things as a growth opportunity instead of like a competition, it helps.
Mm-hmm. No, I couldn't agree more. I like that essence of talking about bringing in collaboration. I think, what was it? David Meerman Scott said, learn how to play nice on the internet. Because the moment that, you may have seen news on this, the moment that somebody gets really pissy on the internet or says, this is our copyright, or especially copywriting, I could go into detail about the Fine brothers who tried to copyright React, and it completely blew up in their face when they tried to do that, because, obviously the community's like, how dare you? How dare you try to copyright something that's ours, right? Yeah. It's the community, not yours. So yeah, I love that answer. Ethan has a question. Where do you host your RSS feed? And how did you get podcast available on iTunes/Spotify?
So this is a large question because there are so many providers. This is also where resources come into play. We made the decision right off the bat that we were going to allot $30 a month, no matter what, to host our podcast. So we use Libsyn. And the reason we were going to do that is because Libsyn is one of the leading places for podcast hosting. And they also have really extensive analytics. And they also have immediate transfers to things like iTunes and everything like that. So Libsyn works as an aggregator. And then all you have to do is you just use their platform, and then their platform then shoots you out to everything else. There is a little bit of extra work that you have to do on the iTunes side, where you just have to like make a Podcast Connect account and then verify everything. But outside of that, Libsyn is amazing for doing that. That said, we do pay for space. So we have an allotment that we pay for. And if we go over, we have to either pay more money or upgrade the plan to hold more space. But we're really analytics driven, and we're really focused on maintaining stuff because transferring podcast hosts is a pain. But there are things like Anchor. And Anchor is a extremely good alternative to Libsyn. You don't get as in-depth analytics, but when you're first starting out, you don't, unless you're really an analytics person, you don't necessarily need them. You just need episode count. Anchor does all of that for free. And they also have a way to immediately monetize within it. That being said, Anchor chooses who works with you and that kind of stuff. So it removes some autonomy. But yeah, there's a lot. I specifically use Libsyn. I love Libsyn. You can host multiple shows within Libsyn. So both of mine are run through there under one account. So if you do more than one podcast, it's a really good way to stay organized. But if you're just getting started and you're on a budget, Anchor is an extremely good alternative. And Anchor wasn't around when we started. Like when we started, there were like 3 or 4 podcasting services. There weren't that many, which is where I realized I've been doing this for 4 years now. Okay. But yeah, that's my answer.
No, and I mean, gosh, how many hosting services do they have now? Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
Aaron has a really good question here. Do you think podcasts need to be centered around one specific topic to be successful, or do you think it's okay for it to not be as niche and explore many different ideas into on one podcast device, interviewing others, reviews, etc.?
My main podcast isn't on one thing. So yeah, you don't have to be super niche. You will have to put up a little bit more of a fight and do some more marketing if you're doing stuff. So sorry, this isn't a cohesive answer. What I like about our podcast is we have one theme, and that theme is pop culture and why it matters. But within that theme, we've talked about the NFL. We've talked about NCAA football, the video game. We've talked about My Hero Academia. We've talked about Zelda. We've done a live episode of Halo. We've also covered like different movie franchises. We have like 10 Star Wars episodes. We work in reviews every now and again. We do AMAs for our big milestones at the 50 marks. That works because it allows us to talk about so many things through the lens that we bring. And the cool thing is, if you have something that's more broad, you do have the ability and flexibility to adjust as things change. If you plan on doing, say, back in the day when Firefly started, you were like, yo, this show is amazing. I'm going to make a giant podcast about Firefly. And then it gets canceled at 12 episodes. So you now only have a 12 episode podcast. So understanding the lengths that you want is important, because in a way, non-niche podcasts are evergreen, because eventually you're gonna like scrape that bucket. So yeah, I like them. I prefer them. Did You Have To started really niche, and now we talk about everything in anime and manga. So that is like, I prefer it. That said, you can get it. The con to it is you have to fight for audience time in a different way. and marketing yourself to brands becomes a little bit harder. So we do run giveaways and stuff that are paid for and sponsored by different PR companies because they specifically want a podcast integration, but they only want them for certain episodes that have to do with or in the same genre of the thing that they're promoting. That impacts how we build out our content schedules, and that becomes an issue because, well, if the new James Bond movie is coming out, I want that episode to release either when the movie releases or the week before, because you want to be timely and you want to get pulled up in search results. But if you have somebody who's going to pay you for your time, you're going to have to adjust your schedule. So that is the one issue that does happen. It does make it harder to reach out for brands, because when you do everything, reaching out for companies that do one thing to sponsor you gets a little bit hard.
And I will say, well, first and foremost, that Firefly was a deep cut, and I'm still sad about that. But again, I like certain animes that are like one season long, and never be able to talk about them again. We're all sad about Firefly. That's right, Chloe. To go along with that, and I will mention that because I follow Kate on Twitter. The schedules that she puts out that I see every now and again, she'll post her whiteboard. I always sit there and go, if there's a person that works harder than Kate right here, I want to meet them, because holy crap, having to write up several scripts for your not only podcast but for your website is tremendous. And I was like, you're going to do 4 of those. I'm going to bed. So y'all run a great program, and I've always respected the hell out of it. So I'm going to go a little bit more pragmatic on this next question, because I'm always curious. You mentioned hosts that are the key thing, but I'm always interested in what are some tools, either hardware or software, for people to build a successful program, maybe that are just starting up.
Audacity. It is a free audio editing program. You don't pay for it. I haven't paid for any sort of audio editing program in the 4 years I've been doing this. Audacity is a phenomenal tool. There are a lot of videos on how you can use it, so you can get more detailed in your editing as you learn. But like, I taught myself to audio edit, and I used Audacity because it was free, because to be honest, sometimes making a podcast sounds like a good idea, and then you realize, whoa, this is too much work. I need to stop. So not investing the money up front in some of these larger tools is a very smart thing. And Audacity is my number one recommendation when it comes to programs. Now, as you spend more time and you know that this is something you're going to do, you can invest in an audio producer, or you can invest in some other programs that I don't know. We got really lucky because our producer on our show, I had 3 episodes back to back that had either a misaligned track or weren't edited correctly, because I was so burnt out and tired that one of our friends was like, Kate, please sit down. I will just do your audio editing for you. So yeah, I would say your audio program. And then if you're going to invest in a good mic, because a good mic will help you in audio editing. But Audacity is really the main program I can recommend, and it's free. Outside of that, though, if you're looking to make graphics and stuff like that, Canva is an amazing alternative to Photoshop. Canva is, I think, between $7.99 and $14.99 a month, from the basic to premium versions. There is a free version as well, and it works just like Photoshop, only they have templates. Like, they have templates that you can use for promotional photos, or for logos and all that type of stuff. So those would be the 2 things. And those are the 2 things that we utilize all these years later too. Another thing that would be that, looking back on it now, investing in Zoom is something that we probably should have done earlier, because Zoom has the recording feature that allows you to record both your video and your audio, and it shoots it out separately. It's a good way to record a backup. Oh, Another great piece of advice, always record a backup recording because something will go wrong somewhere, especially if you have a guest. And Zoom allows you to do that, but it also allows you that if you're rushed for time, and the standard length is if you're going to edit something, it will take 3 times the time of the thing you were editing. If you're editing a 1 hour podcast, it will probably take you 3 hours to edit that entire podcast, depending on like how fast you're running it, the things that you're doing, that kind of stuff. And Zoom allows you to kind of cut some time if you're only using one track because it records everybody. The downside to using one track is nobody can be talking at the same time as other people. Nobody can be clicking at the same time as other people because all that will get picked up. And individual audio tracks allow you the grace to type while somebody is talking or accidentally interrupt them or laugh over them, that type of stuff. But yeah, Zoom, Canva, and Audacity are actually the 3 things that we use for our podcast, at least on the hosting end. And then I believe our audio producer uses a combination of GarageBand and Audacity and something else, but yeah.
Yeah, and I can say I'm definitely guilty of 2 of those things. One is my shoddy boon internet has complicated one of y'all's podcasts. I know that I had to do an individual recording, and God bless them for going and helping with that. But also typing, and I have a very loud keyboard. Okay, so take me through that editing process, if you would be so kind. What are things that you look for? Are there things that you want to say, this is what I want to omit? Small talk before? Take me through the journey here.
So, first off, you need to decide what type of conversation style you want. Do you want the ums and the ahs and the long pauses before somebody talks, or do you want to cut that all out? So you can choose to do that. We tend to be more open because we want it to be more personable. So the more edited it is, the less organic it feels, in my opinion. We edit for length because the average podcast attention span is about 25 to an hour 15. Anything over, you tend to have lower downloads and you tend to not have as many people tune in. And that is just because of time. And think about it, if you're going to go for a run or you're going to drive to go get something or go to work, that's the length that you want your podcast to be. So one of the first things in the editing process is how much did you go over time? So we have had it before. We have recorded 2 hours and 15 minutes of a podcast, and we had to split that into 2 episodes. So that's the first thing. And the easy way is to take out the ums, ahs, the multiple likes, the spaces, and that will usually get you down by a couple minutes. Then you have the small talk. Was it small talk that was conducive to the conversation, or did somebody mention a trilogy and then did you derail into talking about Fable? That's happened where we had an entire 20-minute discussion on the Fable franchise in the middle of our Borderlands episode. So that stuff gets cut. As you're looking for ways to monetize, Patreon is an amazing service that you can use. And for our Patreon specifically, all of the stuff that gets cut like that are longer conversations, those get put onto our Patreon page. So that's an easy thing as well. Finally, did I say something that will make the internet mad at me? That's the other thing you need to look for, especially when you're working with people and when you're recording with people who you're just comfortable with. You have to kind of like, did you say something wrong? Did you accidentally mess up? Did you make a bad joke? And I don't say that to be like censor yourself, but it is something you need to be aware of. The other thing as well is understanding that what you're presenting to somebody, you're really not around to kind of add context outside of what they're listening to. This goes for both saying something that's off color as well as saying something that's wrong. So like we've had to issue corrections in the past on things. And a lot of the times I'll do that in the show notes. Other times we'll let our audio editor know, like, hey, actually, this isn't the right thing. I misnamed this person, or I said this creator did this, but they didn't. And that our audio editor will go in and either remove it, or if it is a substantial amount of the podcast, we'll issue a retraction, but still publish the podcast. So those are the different things that you kind of have to think of. Also understand that there are different levels to internet angry. There is, you said something you probably shouldn't have said in public. And then there's also, oh, you said Hunter X Hunter instead of Hunter Hunter. And then at that point, the joke is a lot in our podcast. I'm going to say this how I want. Come fight me. You have my handle. But it's whatever way you want to do it, but it's understanding the audiences that you're reaching. Like with Did You Have To, me and Nisha said that Deku rewrote the Shonen Hero. We got a long, angry email that was 15 paragraphs long telling us why we were wrong. So yeah, that happens. So yeah, under that's probably more in-depth editing thing than what you need to know, but that's kind of how we approach it. Just to protect ourselves and understand, as well as making sure we're hitting optimal time length.
I will say to that 15 or that paragraph email, lay off our broccoli boy. He's a good boy, and yeah, I'm just kidding. Okay, so to go along with that, and this is kind of the lighter side of editing. Do y'all do clips at all on your podcast?
So we don't, but we should. We just don't have the know-how. So one of the best ways to market your podcast are taking clips out and putting them online and making a nice little graphic for it and putting them on Instagram or Twitter. The new Reels feature and Fleets, like that stuff is perfect. The the audio, I don't know, there's like that one on Twitter where like some people have it, some people don't, where you can leave like a voice memo type thing. That's amazing for podcasting. You do run into accessibility issues with that. So you do have to kind of think what you're like, you add some captioning, please. It's that in those senses, it's not hard to make your social media marketing when it involves audio captioned. Do it. It's easy. But that clips are phenomenal. We should be doing it. We don't, because we don't have time and we don't have the know-how. So that's really the only issue there. But yeah, clips are good.
I know with Anxiety, she does clips on her particular streams. She's really good at them in terms of marketing a new program or what have you. Now, her job, she is a Twitch partner, so that is her job, that she's able to do that. So but it is something that, you know, if y'all are interested in this, taking the time to do clips can go a long way. And you know, this is actually something that's been going on for a long time with Let's Plays. I know one of the more popular YouTube channels, and not so much anymore, but Game Grumps would do these something on audio, and then people who were fans would illustrate these small clips and make it into something that's, again, that collaborative effort, which was super cool. Still happens today, but that is a consideration. Okay, got one or two more questions, and again, I want to be respectful of your time, so if you need to leave, just let me know. So for interviewing, though, what are some tips that you can make an interviewee comfortable or willing to share their thoughts a little bit more if you're doing guests on your program?
Do your research. Like, look them up, look up their work, read a couple of pages of it, watch a couple of episodes of it. Make sure you're knowledgeable, because they will pick up if you're not. It's very easy to do that. Also, the first thing you should do, ask them how you pronounce their name, because that is important. Actually, and I didn't correct him, but Emery said my last name wrong.
Did I really?
It's Sánchez, not Sanchez.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
But no, and so I actually left that there because I knew this question was coming and I wanted to bring it up to highlight it. It doesn't, I mean, it doesn't bother me too much, but there are some people where it will, because it's your name and they deserve to have that pronounced correctly. So just asking, and I had never thought about it. I always do it instinctually, whether it's somebody who's coming on to be a guest or somebody that I'm interviewing, because I know that it happens with my name. But I was on a morning show, talk show, that some people run on Twitch, and they sent me a question saying, "How do you phonetically pronounce your name?" And I was like, "Oh, I never thought about asking that, but thank you. That's a really good thing." So when you bring on an interviewee, you can ask them, like, make sure that you tell them everything that's involved. If it's on camera, even if you're not going to use the video, let them know that it's on camera, because some people may not want to either be on camera, may have an issue with being on camera, or may just want to get prepared to be on camera because of like social anxiety issues and stuff like that. Let them know those specifics. Send them prep in advance. You don't have to send them the exact questions, but be like, "I want to talk about X, Y, and Z," somewhere in the ballpark. So like usually what I do, and most of the time I work with publicists when I do interviews, and I'm like, "I'm going to talk about this movie. I'm going to talk about the theme of mental health, and I'm going to talk about their future projects and everything in between." That way somebody comes in knowing what your expectations are of them. For guests, very simple. I send an outline that says, "This is what the show usually is," short history on the production of the thing we're talking about, the but why those on why that thing is important. And then I'm going to need your personal take on why does X matter. And that's a really simple thing that I write up for them, just so that they understand. I think also letting them know what type of podcast you're running. So can they cuss? Can they talk about certain things? Are you a Logitech partner and you don't want them talking about their HyperX products offhand? Like that type of stuff. Like give them all of your expectations and requirements, because there's nothing scarier than going into a situation where you have no idea what you're doing. Because like I get invited on podcasts where like I've not even mutuals with somebody, but I'm like, "Okay, sure, I'll go talk about why Agent 47 is really attractive." But I don't know them. But what helps me is I see their format. They've sent me a previous episode that they've done, and they've done what they can to make me understand what I'm walking into. And that's really where it kind of lies, in making somebody feel comfortable in a space.
That's a great answer. And I definitely appreciate your feedback on that. As a class, do y'all have any other questions for Kate Sánchez? I feel like an ass. I'm so sorry.
No, don't. Seriously, it does not bug me that much. Like, it's fine. I just figured it was a really good teaching moment on why you should ask people how to.
I'm sure my class is just enjoying me turning beet red from doing something stupid like that. So a mistake not to be made again. Yeah, thanks, Chloe. I'm gonna put your socials up here, and because I'm a horrible person and got caught up, I did not start the recording the way I wanted to. So if you wouldn't just one more time introducing yourself and where people can find you, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so I am Kate Sánchez, editor-in-chief of But Why the Geek Community, host of But Why the podcast and Did You Have To. You can find me at Oh My Myth Randier on Twitter and Instagram, and that's where you can contact me.
And let me go into Twitter real quick and make sure that.
Yeah, my handle's real hard to spell. I just wanted to make a Lord of the Rings reference, and that was pretty much my decision with there. And then somebody said, "You should have just said Gandalf instead of Mithrandir, because then you could be OMG." And I was like, wow, I really fumbled the bag.
and now that's your Twitter handle.
Yep.
Damn it.
My missed opportunity, which will forever haunt me.
Well, again, and would it be okay if students have any questions to reach out to you? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. Again, I used to be a teacher. I miss that stuff. I'm always like, I am always here to answer people's questions, because it is scary out there and failing sucks sometimes. But what makes failing not suck is I can help people with my failures so they don't repeat them. So I'm always open for conversation, always open to have my brain picked. I'm just a DM away. And if you don't feel comfortable DMing me, or for whatever reason it gets stuck in the requests, which usually happens because I don't check them, they're kind of messy. My email is in my bio on my Twitter, so feel free to shoot me an email as well.
And that, what a great public service announcement there. I like that, because that's always my first advice for people that are getting into this kind of stuff. It's I'm like, be prepared to fail, because it's going to happen a lot.
Yeah, 100%. I will say this. I think, and this is maybe off topic, maybe not, as a culture, we don't respect failing enough. Failing's okay. And coming from academia, like I went into half of my research projects expecting for it to not work. And that's fine, because what happens from failure is you learn how to make things that do work. You learn how to correct your mistakes. And then it becomes a teachable moment, not only to you, but for people that you can help and impact in the future. So, like, never be afraid to fail. It's totally fine. I've done it a lot. So I have like 6 failed pitches in the last 2 months. It's okay. So yeah.
No, great. That really is to academia, because any paper you accept
Oh
or
yeah.
you put out there, it's never going to be accepted as you put it out there. So again, if you have any questions for myself or Kate, please feel free to reach out. Kate, thank you so much for meeting with us and
Yeah.
sharing your expertise, because this was outstanding.
Yeah, thank you. This was amazing. And honestly, like, I know you mentioned getting Matt in and stuff. He does all of our community management and analytics and drives a lot of our content strategy, because he understands how to make numbers do things. I don't. I just talk.
Again, I've had both of y'all on at one point or another, and you're both excellent. So I'll be reaching out to Matt at some point, especially community management will be a good topic to talk about. So, all right. Well, I am going to stop recording.